turn off that TV. I'm not going to support that lazy old woman at home." Those words came from my own son, Marcelo, whom I carried for months, whom I breastfed, whom I taught to walk, to talk, to be a man. He stood in front of me, his face red with anger, while I watched my favorite soap opera after a long day. And his wife, Patricia, the one I welcomed into my home like a daughter, was beside him with a mocking smile on her lips. "My name is Leonor Beitenker, I'm 67 years old, and until a year ago, I had a life many would consider perfect. My husband Antonio and I built a life together with hard work and dedication. He was a good man, honest, who cared for me and our son with all the love in the world. We raised Marcelo with values, or at least we thought we did. Exactly 1 year ago, Antonio left us. A sudden heart attack took away the love of my life in minutes. I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. The emptiness that remained seemed endless. Every corner of our home in Murumbai held memories of him. The place where he loved to have coffee looking at the garden. The armchair where he sat to read the newspaper every morning. Even his scent seemed to linger in the sheets, in the clothes, in the air. It was in this moment of vulnerability that Marcelo and Patricia suggested moving in with me. "Mom, you can't stay alone in this huge house. We'll take care of you," he said in a tone that at the time seemed genuinely concerned. How wrong I was. The first weeks were calm. They moved into the guest room. They brought their things. Patricia sometimes cooked, although she never bothered to ask what I would like to eat. Marcelo went to work at the law firm, where he never had much success, and returned at the end of the day. I tried to be helpful, washing a dish, folding some clothes, so I wouldn't feel like a burden, even in my own home. But soon things began to change. The comments started small, almost imperceptible. "Wow, do you really watch TV all day? Mom, don't you think you're eating too much? This house needs a renovation. Everything here is so old." That word started appearing more and more in conversations, and with it came disrespect. My space began to shrink. First, they reorganized the living room, taking down my family photos and putting up theirs. Then, Patricia started inviting her friends over without telling me. I would go down the stairs and find the house full of people I barely knew. "Oh, Mrs. Leonor, you don't mind, do you? After all, the house is big," she would say with that fake smile. I started to retreat to my room. There, at least, I still had control over what was mine. Antonio and I had worked so hard to build that life. He with his real estate business, me managing the house and helping in the companies when he needed. I never imagined I would one day be treated like a stranger under my own roof. Antonio's estate was going through the courts. No one knew for sure what he had left or how he had organized his assets. He had always been very discreet with finances, even with me. "Don't worry, Leonor. Everything is organized. If I ever go missing, you won't have to worry," he used to say. I trusted him blindly. Meanwhile, the situation at home was only getting worse. Marcelo started to control my spending. "Mom, do you really need another dress? Money is tight," he would say. While Patricia flaunted a new designer bag, they began discussing selling the house. "It's too big for you, Mom. We could buy a smaller apartment and invest the rest," Marcelo suggested at one of our dinners. What he really meant was, "Let's sell your house and use the money for ourselves." That night, the night that changed everything, started like any other. I was in the living room watching my soap opera after dinner. It had been a special day, though no one at home knew. Dr. Paulo Montero, Antonio's trusted lawyer, had visited me in the morning while Marcelo was at work and Patricia was out shopping. "Mrs. Leonor, I have good news," he said, placing a folder on the kitchen table. The estate inventory was finalized. All of Antonio's assets were transferred to you, as he stated in his will. I opened the folder with trembling hands and began to read the documents. The house in Murumbai, the farm in Minas Gerais, the commercial building on Avenida Paulista, the beach house in Guarujá, all the bank accounts, investments, stocks, everything, absolutely everything, was in my name. Over 8 million Brazilian reals in assets. Antonio had kept his promise. I was protected. Are you okay? Dr. Paulo asked, concerned about my silence. Yes, I replied, feeling tears streaming down my face. I'm just overwhelmed to see how Antonio took care of everything until the end. I spent the whole day thinking about how to tell Marcelo. Maybe the news of the inheritance would improve our relationship. Perhaps, knowing there were no financial problems, he would return to being the loving son he once was. I put the documents in the drawer of my dresser and waited. At 7 p.m., I heard the front door slam shut. Marcelo came in a bad mood, as usual. Patricia was right behind him, talking on the phone with one of her friends. I was sitting on the sofa that Antonio and I had chosen decades ago, watching my soap opera. I was eager to share the news, to show that everything would be okay. That's when he walked into the room, threw his work folder on the floor, and shouted those words that would forever be etched in my memory. Turn off that TV. I'm not going to support a lazy old woman at home. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. I looked at my son's face, twisted with rage, and then at Patricia, who had hung up the phone and was now laughing at the situation, as if my humiliation was a funny show. In that moment, something inside me changed. The pain gave way to a strange calm, a clarity I had never felt before. I saw my son and my daughter-in-law for who they really were, petty, selfish people, just waiting for the right moment to take what they thought belonged to them. I, who had spent the whole day thinking about how to share my joy and my fortune with them, could now only think of one thing. They didn't deserve anything that Antonio and I had built with so much love and hard work. Absolutely nothing. I stood up from the sofa with a dignity I didn't know I still had in me. I was tired of hiding, of belittling myself, of accepting crumbs of consideration in my own home. It was time to show them who was really in control. I walked silently to my room, my heart pounding in my chest. Each step I took down the hallway felt like I was walking through a new version of my home. No longer that place of happy memories I built with Antonio, but a battlefield where I was treated as the enemy. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed I had shared with my husband for 42 years. I ran my hand over the empty side, feeling his absence like a physical pain. Antonio's death was sudden, one of those that leaves no time for goodbyes. We were having breakfast on a Sunday morning when he simply clutched his chest, knocked over his coffee cup, and fell. The doctor said it was a heart attack. He didn't suffer, but I did. I suffer even today. His departure left a void that felt impossible to fill, an open wound that bled a little more each day. The first weeks after the burial were a blur of faces, condolences, food I couldn't eat, and nights I couldn't sleep. Friends and family came to visit. They brought comforting words that didn't comfort, frozen meals that piled up in the fridge. And Marcelo, my only son, would show up now and then, asking if I needed anything and then leaving. At the time, I interpreted his distance as grief. Everyone deals with pain differently, I thought. It was in the first month after Antonio's death that Marcelo suggested moving in with me. We were sitting on the back porch, the place where my husband liked to have his afternoon coffee, looking at the garden we planted together. "Mom, I've been thinking." He started with that voice he used when he wanted to convince me of something since he was a child. "This house is too big for you to be alone. Patricia and I could move in to keep you company. What do you think?" In that moment, the idea felt like a gift from heaven. The lonely nights were the worst. The silence was deafening, the bed cold, the thoughts dark. The presence of my son and his wife would bring life back to those walls. Or at least that's what I thought. "That would be wonderful, son," I replied, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. They moved in that weekend. They brought suitcases, boxes, furniture. They took over the guest room downstairs, the one with a view of the garden. Marcelo said it would be better this way, so I wouldn't have to go up and down the stairs. At the time, I believed it was out of concern. The first signs that something was wrong began subtly, small changes in the household routine. Breakfast, which I always served at 7, became at 8:30 because Patricia needed more sleep. Lunch, which had always been served in the dining room, moved to the kitchen because it was less work. My afternoon TV shows that I watched in the living room were interrupted because Patricia needed to use the living room to entertain her friends. I clearly remember the day I realized I was no longer in my own home, but in theirs. It was about 3 weeks after they moved in. I went downstairs for breakfast and found the kitchen table full of people I barely knew. Patricia's work colleagues she had invited for a Sunday brunch. "Ah, Mrs. Leonore, you're awake," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I prepared a meal for you to have in your room. This way, you'll be more comfortable, you know?" I took the plate she handed me, a meager sandwich and a cup of lukewarm coffee. Then I went back to my room, feeling like a stranger in the house I had decorated myself, in the rooms where I raised my son, on the walls that had witnessed decades of my life. From that point on, things only got worse. Marcelo, who had always been a sweet boy, began to show a side I had never seen before, or perhaps never wanted to see. His tone shifted, from patient to irritated. The questions about how I was doing turned into criticisms of what I was doing. "Mom, don't you think you're gaining too much weight? All that candy isn't good for you. Mom, why do you leave the TV on all day? The electricity bill is high. Mom, do you really need so many clothes? Your closet is a mess." Each comment felt like a tiny needle piercing my skin, lingering there, hurting. And worst of all, I started to believe them. I began to see myself through my son's and his wife's eyes, as an old useless woman, a burden, someone who needed to be tolerated. Meanwhile, Antonio's probate process was ongoing in court. My husband had always been very private about our finances. He handled the business, I took care of the home. We trusted each other enough not to need to go into details. I knew we had a comfortable life, that his businesses were doing well, that we had savings, but the exact details, the numbers, the investments, all of that was his territory. "Don't worry, Leonore," he used to say when I asked about money. "Everything is in order. If I'm ever not here, you and Marcelo will be well taken care of." I trusted him. I always had. But now, a widow and seemingly at the mercy of my own son, I began to worry. What if Antonio hadn't left everything organized as promised? What if the money ran out? Where would I go? Dr. Paulo Montero, Antonio's trusted lawyer for decades, visited me periodically to update me on the probate process. We always scheduled visits for when Marcelo and Patricia weren't home. Not because I wanted to hide anything, but because his visits were one of the few moments I felt connected to Antonio, to the life we had together. "The process is moving along normally, Mrs. Leonore," he told me at each visit. "Your husband was a very meticulous man. Everything is well documented, but bureaucracy takes its time. Time, that relentless master that waits for no one." Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And with each passing day, the treatment I received in my own home worsened. I began to notice that my personal belongings were disappearing. First, it was a picture frame with a photo of me and young Antonio, which had always sat on the living room table. Then, the books from my office shelf were replaced by modern decorative items that Patricia brought in. My garden, which I tended to with such care, was handed over to a gardener they hired because you're too old to be out in the sun. My physical space shrank in proportion to my emotional space. I started to withdraw more and more. I spent hours in my room, looking through old photo albums, reminiscing about the life I had, the person I used to be. At night, I cried silently so as not to disturb anyone, to avoid giving them another reason to complain about the old crybaby. It was during this time that Marcelo started talking about selling the house. We were having dinner, or rather, I was sitting at the table watching them eat, as my appetite had diminished significantly. "Mom, I've been thinking." He started with that same manipulative tone. "This house is too big for us. It takes a lot of work to maintain. I think we should sell it and buy something smaller, more modern, maybe an apartment." I felt as if I had been slapped. Selling the house, the house where Antonio and I raised our son, where we celebrated birthdays, Christmases, where we planted every tree in the garden, where we lived a lifetime of love. But this is our home. That was all I could say. My voice choked. It's just a house, Mom? Marcelo replied without even looking up from his plate. And it's worth a lot of money. We can use what's left from the sale to invest, secure your future. Wow, I mean, your future. The small slip didn't go unnoticed. Wow, this is what they wanted. My house, my money, my life, all for them. That night, lying in my bed, I cried until I had no tears left. I cried for Antonio, for his absence, for how life had changed. I cried for the sweet boy my son had been and for the cruel man he had become. I cried for myself, for the strong woman I once was and for the shadow I had turned into. The next morning, I woke up with a resolution. I wouldn't sell the house, not while I was alive. This was my home, the place where Antonio and I built our life together. No one was going to take it from me. When I communicated my decision to Marcelo, he didn't shout, didn't argue, just looked at me with an expression I would never forget. A mix of disdain and cold calculation. We'll see, Mom, we'll see. From that day on, the silent war in our house intensified. The air was thick with tension. Meals became moments of oppressive silence. Patricia barely spoke to me, except to make some cutting remark about my appearance or my habits. Marcelo alternated between completely ignoring my presence and making absurd demands. Mom, Patricia and I are having friends over for dinner. Could you stay in your room all night? We don't want you to get tired, Mom. We decided to redecorate the living room. Those old furniture pieces of yours are so out of style. Mom, the bills are too high. Could you save on your showers? You don't need to shower every day at your age. Each request, each demand, each comment was an attempt to belittle me, to make me feel insignificant, disposable. And the worst part is that for a while, it worked. I began to see myself as they saw me. A burden, a problem to be solved, an old useless woman taking up space. But something inside me, a small flame that refused to go out, kept me strong. Perhaps it was the memory of Antonio. The love we shared, the life we built together. Perhaps it was the certainty that I deserved more than that no one, not even my own son, had the right to treat me that way. It was during this dark period that Dr. Paulo began to bring more concrete news about the inventory. It's almost finished, Mrs. Leonor. He told me during one of his visits. Your husband left everything very well organized. You will be surprised by the outcome. The hope that I would soon have clarity about my financial situation gave me the strength to hold on a little longer. Maybe when the inventory was completed, I could regain some control over my life. Perhaps I could even consider other housing options, away from the toxicity that my own home had become. And so the days went by, each one like the last, in a routine of small humiliations and great sadness, until that day arrived, the day that would change everything. It was a Tuesday morning. Marcelo had left early for work, and Patricia had gone to meet her friends for breakfast. The house was quiet, a silence I had learned to appreciate, as it meant temporary peace. The doorbell rang around 10 o'clock. It was Dr. Paulo with a briefcase under his arm and a smile on his face that I hadn't seen in a long time. Mrs. Leonor, he said as soon as I invited him in. I have great news. The inventory has finally been completed, and I needed to deliver the documents to you in person. We sat in the kitchen, the only place in the house that still held a bit of my personality, and he opened the briefcase on the table. One by one, he showed me the documents, the house in Murumbai, where we were, the farm in Minas Gerais that had belonged to Antonio's family for generations, the commercial building on Avenida Paulista where the company offices were located, the beach house in Guarujá where we spent our summers, the bank accounts, the investments, the stocks, everything, absolutely everything, was in my name. Your husband was very clear in his will, Mrs. Leonor, Dr. Paulo explained. He wanted you to have total control over the assets. He always said he trusted your judgment. I looked at the numbers on the pages in front of me. Over 8 million reis in assets. I, Leonore Bittenker, a 67-year-old widow who had been treated like a beggar in my own home for the past few months, was a wealthy woman, very wealthy. Tears came without warning, a mix of emotions I couldn't name. Gratitude to Antonio for taking such good care of me until the end, relief knowing I wasn't financially dependent on anyone, and a deep sadness thinking about how my own son treated me, not out of necessity, but out of greed. "Are you okay?" Dr. Paulo asked, concerned about my silence. "Yes," I replied, wiping my tears. "I'm just processing all of this." I spent the rest of the day thinking about how I would share the news with Marcelo. A part of me wanted to believe that knowing there were no financial problems would bring back the affectionate son he once was, that our relationship could improve, that we could be a family again. I put the documents in the drawer of my dresser and waited for him to come back from work. The clock in the living room struck 7 when I heard the front door slam shut. Marcelo was back, and from the sound of his heavy footsteps, he was not in a good mood. I was sitting on the living room sofa, watching my favorite soap opera. It was one of the few pleasures I still had left. This moment of escape, of immersing myself in other lives, other problems that weren't my own. I was anxious to share the news, to show him that everything would be all right, that we didn't need to sell the house, that there was enough money for all of us. That's when he walked into the room, threw his briefcase down hard, and shouted those words that would change everything. "Turn off that TV. I'm not going to support a lazy old woman at home." Those words echoed in the room like thunder. Lazy old woman, I who had given my life for that man who now looked at me with such disdain. Patricia followed right behind him, tossed her designer bag on the sofa next to me, and let out that sharp laugh I hated so much. Her eyes sparkled with malicious satisfaction at seeing my pale, shocked face. The remote trembled in my hands. For the first time in months, I didn't feel fear or sadness. I felt anger, a deep, burning anger that started in the pit of my stomach and spread through my body like fire. It was as if something was breaking inside me, not from pain, but from liberation. The invisible chains that bound me to guilt, submission, the idea that I owed them something, simply snapped. "What's wrong, Mom? Are you deaf now? Turn off that crap." Marcelo kept advancing toward me, finger pointed at my face. I took a deep breath, calmly turned off the TV, and stood up. I didn't say a word. I walked to my room, feeling their eyes on me, probably imagining that, as always, I would hide, cry in silence, accept more of that abuse, but not this time. I opened the drawer of my dresser, where I had kept the documents Dr. Paulo had given me earlier. The folder was there, navy blue, with the law firm's letterhead in gold. I picked it up carefully, as if carrying a treasure, and in a way, it was exactly that. I returned to the living room. Marcelo had flopped onto the sofa and was flipping through the TV channels in irritation. Patricia was on her phone, probably telling her friends about another episode of humiliation for her mother-in-law. Neither of them noticed my presence right away. "Marcelo," I called. My voice firmer than it had been in months. "Patricia, I need to show you something." Marcelo turned to me impatiently. "What is it now, Mom?" I don't have patience for silence. I cut him off, surprising myself with the authority in my voice. "It's time for you to listen." I placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it, revealing the inventory documents. I took the first page, the summary of the assets, and extended it to Marcelo. "Your father left me everything," I simply said, "the house, the properties, the businesses, the accounts, over 8 million reis in assets, all in my name." Marcelo's face went through a transformation that, under other circumstances, would have been comical. From irritation to disbelief, from disbelief to surprise, from surprise to panic. Patricia dropped her phone onto her lap, her face suddenly pale. "What are you talking about?" Marcelo grabbed the document, his eyes quickly scanning the numbers. This can't be right." "It's absolutely right," I confirmed. "Dr. Paulo was here this morning to officially hand everything over to me. Your father was very clear in his will. He wanted me to have full control over our assets. Patricia stood up and snatched the paper from Marcelo's hands, her eyes wide as she read the figures. 8 million. But yes, Patricia, 8 million. And that doesn't even include the value of the properties if we decide to sell. I emphasized we decide, making it clear that the decision was mine and mine alone. Funny how you all thought I was just an old bum to be supported, right? The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads, recalculating, rethinking, trying to find a way to save themselves. Marcelo was the first to recover. His face changed, contempt giving way to a forced, almost desperate smile. Mom, this is amazing. I'm so happy for you, for us. We can finally. There is no us, Marcelo. I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. Not anymore. What do you mean? We're a family, Mom. We're here to take care of you, to treat me like trash, to humiliate me in my own home, to call me an old bum. The words came out like precise arrows, hitting him exactly where I knew it would hurt. This isn't family, Marcelo, this is abuse. You're overreacting. He tried, the smile wavering. It was just a moment of stress. Work has been tough. The bills, the bills. I let out a dry laugh. What bills, Marcelo? You live in my house, eat my food, use my electricity? What bills exactly have stressed you out so much that you treat your own mother like trash? Patricia, ever opportunistic, tried to intervene. Mrs. Leonor, we just wanted the best for you. Marcelo cares so much, works so hard, sometimes he gets a little nervous, but it's because he loves you. I looked at my daughter-in-law, that woman who just minutes ago laughed at my humiliation, feeling a mix of pity and disgust. Patricia, please don't insult my intelligence. You both thought I was an old useless burden, someone to be tolerated until you could get your hands on what you believed was Marcelo's inheritance. Well, surprise, there's no inheritance for Marcelo. There's only my wealth built with love and hard work by me and Antonio. Marcelo stood up, desperation now evident in every line of his face. Mom, you can't be serious. We're your only relatives. What are you going to do alone with all that money? I smiled, feeling a calm I hadn't experienced in months. That's the best part, son. I don't have to decide now. I have all the time in the world and I have options. Many options. What kind of options? He asked, his voice betraying the fear he was trying to hide. I can travel? I've always wanted to see Paris, Venice, Tokyo. I can renovate this house? Exactly how I want, without worrying about what you think is modern. I can donate to charities, I can invest, I can, just imagine, live my life as I please, without answering to anyone. But what about us? Patricia asked, her voice shrill with panic. Where will we live? How will we survive? I looked at her, feeling a twinge of satisfaction at seeing her face twisted in fear. That, my dear, is no longer my problem. You have exactly 48 hours to remove your belongings from this house. What? Marcelo shouted, his face red with anger. You can't kick us out. I'm your son? Yes, you are my son. The same son who called me an old hag just a few minutes ago. The same son who treated me like a burden, an inconvenience, an intruder in my own home for an entire year. My voice faltered slightly. The pain of that truth still lingered, despite my new resolve. You are my son, Marcelo, but being my son doesn't give you the right to treat me this way. It doesn't give you the right to my money, my house, or my respect. But where will we go? Patricia insisted, crocodile tears beginning to form in her eyes. You have nowhere to go. You are young, healthy, and have jobs. I'm sure you'll find a place. There are many apartments for rent in Sao Paulo. Maybe not in Murumbai, maybe not with a garden and pool, but certainly something suitable for a couple that needs to, as you said, oh yes, learn to live within a budget. They both looked at me as if I were a stranger. And maybe I was at that moment. The Leonore they knew or thought they knew was a submissive, insecure woman, easily manipulated. The woman standing before them now, with her back straight and a firm gaze, was someone completely different. "You will regret this?" Marcelo threatened, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll be alone. You'll realize how much you need us." "No," I replied with a certainty that came from deep within my soul. "I've been alone for an entire year. I was alone, even with both of you living under the same roof as me. Loneliness doesn't scare me. What scared me was the thought of spending the rest of my days being treated like a burden by my own son." Patricia, always practical, changed tactics. "Donna Leonore, maybe we're all a bit emotional right now. How about we sleep on it? Tomorrow, with a clear head, we can talk better, plan how we'll manage all this property together." "There is no together, Patricia. Cut it out. The decision is made. 48 hours. Not a minute more." "You can't do this," Marcelo shouted, stepping toward me with clenched fists. I didn't back down. I looked him straight in the eyes, unafraid. "I can. This is my house. My name is on the deed. If you don't leave in 48 hours, I'll call the police and accuse you of trespassing." "Your own family?" he asked incredulously. "Family?" I repeated, feeling a deep sadness despite my resolve. "Family doesn't treat family the way you've treated me. Family respects, cares for, loves. What you did to me this year wasn't love, Marcelo, it was abuse, and now it's over." I turned my back and began to walk toward my room. Behind me, I heard Patricia start to cry loudly, a theatrical sob that didn't move me at all. I also heard Marcelo muttering curses, his anger almost palpable in the air. I didn't look back. I entered my room, closed the door, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't lock it. I was no longer afraid of them, no longer afraid of anything. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands still trembling a bit from the adrenaline. On the nightstand beside me was a photo of me with Antonio, taken on our last wedding anniversary. He smiled at the camera, his eyes filled with the love he always gave me. I touched his face in the photograph, feeling the tears start to fall. "You kept your promise, my love," I whispered to his image. "You took care of me until the end. Now it's my turn to take care of myself." I surprisingly slept well that night, despite the sounds of arguing coming from Marcelo and Patricia's room. They alternated between fighting with each other and planning how to convince me to change my mind. I heard scattered phrases. Their guilt should have been smarter. All that money, trying to make her change her mind, but I wouldn't change my mind. For the first time in a long while, I was absolutely sure of what I wanted, of what I needed to do. The next morning, I woke up early, as I always did. I made my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and while watching the sun rise over the garden that Antonio and I had planted together, I made a call. "Dr. Paulo, good morning. This is Leonore Beitenker. I need you to come to my house today. I want to make some changes to my will." He arrived around 10 o'clock, formal as always in his impeccable suit, the leather briefcase under his arm. Marcelo and Patricia had left early, probably to look for a place to live or to consult a lawyer who could contest Antonio's will. I welcomed Dr. Paulo into the living room and explained what I wanted. As he took notes, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in a long time. Every decision I made was a step toward my freedom, reclaiming my dignity. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Leonore?" he asked when I finished explaining my intentions. "It's quite a significant decision." "I am absolutely sure, Doctor. More sure than I've ever been about anything in my life." He nodded, respecting my determination. "I will prepare the documents immediately. I'm very happy to see you like this, Mrs. Leonore. Your husband would be proud." When he left, I spent the rest of the day in a kind of productive trance. I moved from room to room in the house, noting the changes I wanted to make. That wall that Patricia had painted a depressing gray would go back to light yellow, as Antonio and I always liked. The modern, uncomfortable furniture they had brought would be replaced. my garden would be replanted exactly as it was before. More importantly, I began to make plans for the future. A future that, for the first time since Antonio's death, seemed full of possibilities instead of dark and limited. Marcelo and Patricia returned in the late afternoon, both with tight, tense faces. I didn't speak to them, nor did they to me. The house was immersed in a cold silence, broken only by the occasional sound of doors slamming or hurried footsteps in the hallway. I slept well again that night. The next day, the last before the deadline I had given them, I woke up to the sound of suitcases being dragged down the hallway. I got up, put on my robe, and left the room. Marcelo was in the living room, stacking boxes near the door. When he saw me, his face twisted into a bitter expression. "We're leaving," he said, his voice heavy with resentment. "I hope you're satisfied." "I'm not satisfied, Marcelo," I replied honestly. "I'm deeply sad that it has come to this. You are my son, my only son. I loved you from the first moment I held you in my arms, and I will love you until my last breath, but I can't allow you to keep treating me the way you have. It's just money to you, isn't it?" he accused, his eyes shining with anger. "You prefer your money over your own son." "No, Marcelo, it's not about money. It never was. It's about respect, dignity, love." I took a step toward him, feeling my heart tighten with the emotional distance between us. "If you ever understand this, if you ever are ready to treat me with the respect I deserve, my door will be open." He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Don't count on it." Patricia appeared in the hallway carrying another suitcase. She shot me a venomous look but said nothing. They continued loading their things into the car parked at the entrance, working in a silence heavy with anger and resentment. When they finished, Marcelo stopped at the door, the house keys in hand. For a moment, I saw a shadow of uncertainty pass across his face, a glimpse of the boy he once was, but it quickly vanished, replaced by the mask of hardness he had adopted. He threw the keys on the table near the door. "Goodbye, Mom," he said, his voice cold. "I hope you enjoy your loneliness and your money." "Goodbye, son," I replied, feeling tears threaten to fall but keeping them in check. "I'll be here if you ever want to come back, not as the owner of my house or my money, but as my son." He didn't respond, turned his back, grabbed the last suitcase, and left. Patricia followed him without even looking at me. I heard the car start, the sound of the engine fading as they drove away. And then, silence. A silence different from what I had experienced in recent months. Not oppressive silence, heavy with fear and anxiety, but peaceful silence, the silence of freedom. I closed the door, went back to the living room, and sat on the couch that Antonio and I had chosen together decades ago. I looked around at the house that was once again just mine. The tears came then, not from sadness or regret, but from relief and a strange kind of gratitude. "Thank you, Antonio," I whispered to the air, feeling somehow that he could hear me. "Thank you for giving me the chance to rediscover who I am." In that moment, I understood that the true legacy Antonio left me was not the millions in the bank or the properties. It was the chance to start over, to reclaim my voice, my strength, my dignity. And that was priceless. The first day alone at home felt strange. After a whole year of being invisible in my own home, suddenly the spaces were all mine again. I walked slowly through the rooms, rediscovering every corner, every memory embedded in the walls. It was like coming home after a long journey, even though I had never physically left. The sound of my footsteps echoed differently. There was no more constant attention, no fear of disturbing, of being reprimanded. I turned on the old radio in the kitchen, the one Antonio gave me on our 10th wedding anniversary, and let the music fill the house. Music? How long had it been since I listened to music freely? I spent the morning preparing an elaborate coffee just for myself. Eggs, fresh bread, freshly squeezed orange juice, and best of all, no rush. I sat at the table on the porch, watching the birds in the garden, which seemed more alive that morning, or maybe it was just me feeling more alive. My phone rang around noon. It was Lucia, my friend of decades, who Marcelo and Patricia had practically pushed out of our lives. Too intrusive, they said, which meant she noticed how they treated me. Leonore, is that really you? Lucia's voice sounded surprised on the other end. I've been calling for months and couldn't reach you properly. Yes, it's me, Lucia, I replied, feeling a lump in my throat hearing my friend's voice. I'm alone now. Marcelo and Patricia don't live here anymore. There was a brief silence, and then, thank God, can I come over right now? 2 hours later, Lucia and I were sitting in the living room with cups of tea in our hands, just like old times. She looked different, her hair grayer, a few new wrinkles, but her eyes still had the same warm sparkle that always comforted me. I knew something was wrong, she said after I told her everything that had happened. All those excuses for me not to visit. You never answering the phone. I even went to the police station to ask if they could do something, but they told me they couldn't intervene without proof of abuse. I should have asked for help, I admitted, feeling the weight of my own complicity in the abuse I suffered. But I was ashamed. Ashamed to admit that my own son treated me that way. Lucia took my hand in hers. Don't blame yourself, Leonore. That's how abuse works. They isolate you, make you doubt yourself, convince you that you deserve to be treated poorly. In that moment, with Lucia's words, something broke inside me. I started to cry. Not the silent tears I had shed alone for months, but deep sobs that came from the depths of my soul. It was as if every humiliation, every cruel word, every moment of despair was finally finding a way out. Lucia hugged me, letting me cry until there were no more tears. When I finally calmed down, I felt different, lighter somehow, as if I had expelled a poison from my system. And now? Lucia asked, pouring more tea. What are you going to do with your newly regained life and all this money? The question hung in the air like a delicate butterfly, full of possibilities, waiting to land somewhere. What was I going to do? For so long, my existence had been reduced to surviving day by day, trying to take up as little space as possible. I hadn't allowed myself to dream, plan, or desire. I don't know, I replied honestly. I think before anything else, I need to rediscover who I am. Lucia smiled, a smile full of understanding and affection. Well, that sounds like an excellent first step. After she left, promising to come back the next day, I sat on the porch until sunset, thinking about everything that had happened and what was to come. The night gently fell over the garden, the stars beginning to dot the dark sky. It was a sight I had always loved but had forgotten to appreciate lately. That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time in months. The following days were a mix of liberation and rediscovery. I made small changes around the house. I put my favorite books back on the living room shelf. I started using the embroidered towels my mother gave me again. I hung up the pictures that Marcelo and Patricia had taken down, thinking they were out of style. These little acts of reclaiming brought me immense satisfaction. A week after they left, I received a call from Dr. Paolo. Mrs. Leonore, the documents you requested are ready. Can I come by this afternoon? When he arrived, he presented me with a folder containing the new papers. My revised will. I sat in the living room and read every word carefully. It was exactly what I wanted, a small amount for Marcelo, conditioned on community service, the rest divided between my granddaughter Joanna, who always treated me with kindness, and a new foundation I was creating, the Antonio Bitenker Foundation, to help elderly victims of domestic abuse. It's perfect, Doctor, I said, signing the documents, just as I wanted. Dr. Paolo smiled, putting the papers back in the folder. Your husband would be very proud, Mrs. Leonore. He always said you were the strongest person he knew, even if sometimes you didn't see it yourself. Those words touched something deep within me. Antonio always saw a strength in me that I didn't recognize. And now, I was finally beginning to see it too. Dr. Paolo, I called as he was at the door. There's one more thing I'd like to do. Yes, Mrs. Leonore? I want to learn more about Antonio's business. The companies, the investments. I want to learn how to manage them. He seemed surprised for a moment, but then his face broke into a genuine smile. It will be a pleasure to teach you, Mrs. Leonore. We can start tomorrow, even if you want. And so began a new phase of my life. Every morning, Dr. Paolo came to my house, and we spent hours reviewing documents, analyzing investments, discussing strategies. At first, it was all very confusing: numbers, terms, concepts I had never needed to understand before, but gradually, things started to make sense. I discovered I had a natural talent for business that I had never had the chance to develop. Antonio always took care of everything, and then Marcelo tried to take on that role, but now it was my turn, and I was determined to do things my way. Rumors began to circulate in the extended family about the new Leonor. Cousins, nephews, and acquaintances who barely visited when Antonio was alive suddenly started calling, wanting to schedule lunches, showing a sudden concern for my well-being. At first, I entertained a few out of politeness, but soon I realized their interest wasn't in me, but in what I now had, except for Joanna, my granddaughter. She showed up at my house one Sunday afternoon unannounced, carrying a box of homemade chocolates that she knew were my favorites. "Grandma," she said, hugging me tightly. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. Dad said you didn't want visitors, that you were sick and tired." "Your father lied, dear," I replied, hugging her back just as tightly. "I've always wanted to see you. Always." We sat on the porch eating chocolates and catching up. Joanna was in her 4th year of medical school, about to start her internship. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about her plans for the future, the specialty she wanted to pursue, geriatrics, to help people like me. She said, "Grandma, can I ask you something?" She spoke after a moment of silence. "Is it true that you kicked Dad and Patricia out of the house?" I sighed, searching for the right words. "Yes, it's true. Your dad and Patricia weren't treating me well, Joanna. For a long time, I put up with things no one should endure, especially from people who are supposed to love us." Her eyes filled with tears. "I suspected as much. Every time she came to visit, they made excuses. They said you were resting, that you didn't want to be disturbed. Once, I heard Patricia talking about how hard it was to deal with a stubborn old lady. I was so angry, but I didn't know what to do. I took her hands in mine. There was nothing you could do, my love. It was something I needed to resolve myself. And now it's resolved." After that day, Joanna started visiting me regularly. Sometimes she brought friends from college, filling the house with youthful laughter and lively conversations. It was as if the house was waking up from a long sleep, just like me. 2 weeks after I kicked Marcelo and Patricia out, I received an unexpected call. It was Fernando, our neighbor for over 20 years. Fernando had always been kind, always greeted me when we met, even during the time Marcelo and Patricia did everything to isolate me. "Mrs. Leonor," he said, his voice hesitant. "I hope I'm not being intrusive, but are you okay? I noticed your son and his wife moved out, and I got worried." His concern seemed genuine, unlike the calculated interest others had shown. "I'm fine, Fernando. In fact, I'm better than I've been in a long time." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm glad to hear that. And well, I know it might seem forward of me, but I'd like to invite you to dinner sometime, as neighbors, of course, to celebrate your new beginning." I was surprised by the invitation, but not unpleasantly. Fernando was an interesting man, cultured, kind, a widower like me, as far as I knew, and it had been so long since anyone had invited me to anything social. "It would be a pleasure, Fernando. Thank you for the invitation." We dined at a small, cozy restaurant in the Gardens neighborhood. The food was excellent, the wine smooth, the conversation flowing and enjoyable. Fernando told me about his career as a university professor, now retired, about his 2 children living abroad, about his passions, literature, classical music, gardening. "I always admired your garden, Mrs. Leonor," he commented as we had coffee after the meal. "Those red roses by the wall are spectacular. Antonio planted them for me on our 20th wedding anniversary." I shared, feeling a nostalgic smile form on my lips. He didn't know much about gardening, but he tried so hard. After that, taking care of those roses became a kind of ritual for us both. Fernando smiled understandingly. It's good to preserve those memories, to honor them, but it's also good to create new ones, don't you think? That night made me realize how much I had closed myself off from the world, even before Antonio's death. Our life was good, but restricted. Close friends, few social events, a predictable and comfortable routine. There was nothing wrong with that, but now I realized there was a whole world out there that I had never explored. In the following weeks, I began to expand my horizons. I accepted an invitation from Lucia to a concert at the Municipal Theater. I went with Joanna to a contemporary art exhibition that, to my surprise, I found fascinating. I dined again with Fernando, this time at a Japanese restaurant. My first experience with sushi at 67 years old. Each new experience felt like a small victory, a confirmation of my newly found freedom. I also started dressing differently. Brighter colors, more modern styles that still reflected who I was. I got my hair cut at a chic salon recommended by Lucia. I swapped my old glasses for a lighter, more current frame. "My God, Leonor, you look rejuvenated," Lucia exclaimed when she saw me after all these changes. "You even seem taller, you know? I think you're finally walking with your back straight like you should." And she was right. I felt physically different. The hunched posture, a result of months trying to make myself smaller, invisible, had given way to an upright, confident stance. My once downcast eyes now faced the world directly. The hands that trembled were now steady. A month after Marcelo and Patricia left, I made a decision I had been considering for some time. I called Deborah, the accountant Dr. Paolo had introduced me to, and asked her to transfer a significant amount to a separate account. "What's this for, Mrs. Leonor?" she asked, always discreet and efficient. "For the Antonio Beitenker Foundation," I replied. "I want to start getting it up and running as soon as possible." The idea for the foundation had come almost naturally. I wanted to do something meaningful with the money Antonio had left, something that honored his memory while helping people going through situations similar to mine. The Antonio Beitenker Foundation, aimed at supporting the elderly, would be dedicated to helping elderly victims of domestic abuse, offering legal and psychological support, and, in extreme cases, temporary housing. I had already discussed the legal aspects with Dr. Paolo, the financial issues with Deborah, and even talked to Joanna, who suggested partnerships with university hospitals to provide specialized medical care. It was an ambitious project that would require a lot of work and dedication, but for the first time in a long while, I felt energized, motivated, alive. I had a purpose that went beyond my own existence, something that could make a difference in the lives of many people. Around this time, I received the first call from Marcelo since his departure. I was in the kitchen preparing a chocolate cake, another small pleasure I had rediscovered when the phone rang. "Mom." His voice sounded hesitant on the other end. "It's me, Marcelo." My heart skipped a beat. Despite everything, he was still my son, my only son. "Hello, Marcelo, how are you?" "Not very well, to be honest," he replied, his voice tired. "Things have been tough." I felt a pang of worry. "What happened? Are you sick?" "No, it's not that. It's just that the rent for the apartment we found is really high, and we had to buy furniture, utensils, everything new. The bills are piling up and, that's it." Not a reconciliation, not an apology, but a request for money. I understand this, keeping my voice neutral, even though my heart tightened with disappointment. "And what do you expect me to do about it, Marcelo?" There was a pause. "Well, Mom, I thought maybe with all this inheritance you could help us a little. Just until we get settled properly." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. A part of me wanted to help him, to give him the money he asked for, to do anything to maintain some kind of relationship with my son. But another part, the wiser part, knew that would be a mistake, that it would mean going back to the old pattern, allowing him to use me again. "No, Marcelo," I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I won't give you money." "But Mom," he protested, indignation quickly replacing his conciliatory tone. We are your family, your only family. Family doesn't call me an old bum, Marcelo. Family doesn't treat me the way you all treated me for a whole year. My voice was calm but resolute. If you want to talk to me, if you want to rebuild our relationship, I'm open to that. But it will never be based on money again. Are you going to regret this? He threatened, his voice now filled with anger. You'll end up alone, with no one to take care of you when you get really old and sick. I'd rather be alone than in bad company, son. I replied, feeling a deep sadness but also an unwavering certainty. And what about who will take care of me in the future? Well, I have resources to ensure I'll receive the best care if and when I need it. But more importantly, I have true friends, people who care about me for who I am, not for what I have. He hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there, the phone in my hand, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the son I seemed to have lost for good. Relief for having stood my ground, for not giving in. That night, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, I reflected on everything that had happened since Antonio's death. The pain, the mourning, the abuse, the discovery of the inheritance, the liberation. It felt like I had lived several lives in just 1 year. Would you be proud of me, Antonio? I asked aloud to the starry sky, imagining he could somehow hear me. Would he have approved of my decisions? There was no answer, of course. Just the soft sound of crickets in the garden and the occasional rustle of leaves in the night breeze. But somehow, I felt peace. I felt I was on the right path, that I had finally found my voice, my strength, my place in the world. At 67, after a lifetime of being a wife, mother, caregiver, I was finally discovering who Leonor Beitenker was, and I was really enjoying what I was finding. 6 months had passed since that fateful night when my son called me an old bum. And I finally found the courage to change my life. It feels like such a long time and yet just a blink of an eye. The house in Murumbai, once a silent battlefield, now pulses with renewed energy. The curtains are always open, letting the sun flood every corner. Music plays freely throughout the rooms. The aroma of home-cooked meals often fills the kitchen. It's a home again. My home. This Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of birds singing in the garden that has regained its former splendor. The red roses Antonio planted are blooming beautifully, as if celebrating this new phase with me. I had my coffee on the balcony, watching the street bustle, neighbors walking their dogs, kids riding bikes. For so long, I kept myself isolated from this simple, beautiful everyday world. The phone rang while I was washing my cup. It was Joanna, my dear granddaughter. Grandma, is everything ready for this afternoon? I'm so excited. I smiled at her enthusiasm. Yes, dear, everything is organized. Dr. Paolo confirmed he'll be here at 3 with all the documents. Deborah is coming too to explain the financial part. I can't wait. What you're doing is so important, Grandma. It's going to help so many people. Today is a special day, the official opening of the Antonio Beitenker Foundation for Elderly Support. Not a grand ceremony with endless speeches and ribbons to cut, but an intimate gathering with the people who made this possible and those who will benefit from the work. After hanging up, I went to the office. Once Antonio's forbidden territory, now my workspace. The walls, once a dark, austere color, now displayed a comforting light green. The heavy mahogany desk was replaced by a lighter table, with space for my computer. Yes, I learned to use one at 67, along with various documents organized in colorful folders. I sat down to review the Foundation's bylaws once more. Every word in that document was carefully considered, discussed with lawyers, social workers, and psychologists. We wanted to create something truly useful that addressed the real needs of vulnerable elderly people. The initial idea of just offering legal and psychological support evolved into something much broader. The Foundation would now include a temporary shelter for emergency cases, a community center to combat social isolation, and partnerships with universities for specialized medical care. This last suggestion came from Joanna, who used her contacts at the medical school. What started as a way to process my own traumatic experience transformed into a project that could change many lives. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Despite all the pain, I found a greater purpose. The intercom buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. It was Lucia arriving early to help me with the preparations for the small afternoon event. "Look at you," she exclaimed, saying I looked 10 years younger than the day I met you again. I laughed, hugging my dear friend. I think I'm finally living instead of just existing. Together, we arranged the room to welcome the guests. There wouldn't be many: Dr. Paulo and his wife Deborah, the accountant Fernando, who now held a special place in my life, Joanna, and a few of her college friends who volunteered to work at the foundation, along with 3 ladies from the elderly support group I met at the community center. "Did you invite Marcelo?" Lucia asked as we arranged the flowers in the center of the table. I sighed, feeling that familiar pang in my heart. I invited him, left a message on his answering machine. He didn't respond. Lucia squeezed my hand gently. "He'll understand one day, Leonor. Or maybe not. But that doesn't define who you are, nor does it diminish what you're achieving." In recent months, my relationship with my son had been practically non-existent. After that phone call asking for money, he tried to contact me 2 more times with similar requests. When he realized I wouldn't give in, he simply disappeared. I learned from Joanna that he and Patricia were living in a small apartment in a distant neighborhood. He was still at the same law firm without much success. And Patricia had gotten a job as a saleswoman in a department store, something she surely considered beneath her dignity. Part of me still suffered from this distance. After all, Marcelo was my only son, the boy I once cradled in my arms and sang lullabies to. But another part, the stronger, wiser part, knew that this distance was necessary. Some relationships can only be healthy with space and clear boundaries. At exactly 3 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. Dr. Paulo was the first, as punctual as ever, bringing his wife Clara, an elegant woman with kind eyes, who hugged me as if we were longtime friends. Then came Deborah, Fernando, Joanna with her college friends, and finally the 3 ladies from the support group, Mrs. Amelia, Mrs. Conceição, and Mrs. Teresa. Once everyone was settled in the living room, with glasses of sparkling wine or juice in hand, Dr. Paulo cleared his throat gently to get our attention. "We are gathered here today to celebrate not only the official establishment of the Antonio Beitenker Foundation for Elderly Support but also to honor the extraordinary woman who made this possible, Mrs. Leonor Beitenker." I felt my face flush with unexpected praise. Dr. Paulo continued. "I met Antonio and Leonor over 30 years ago. I witnessed the love and respect they shared, the family they built, the challenges they faced together. When Antonio passed away, I confess I was worried about how Mrs. Leonor would cope with this loss, but what I have witnessed in recent months has been one of the greatest lessons in resilience and dignity I have ever seen." I looked around the room at the faces watching me with warmth and admiration, and I felt tears forming in my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of deep gratitude. "The foundation we inaugurate today," Dr. Paulo continued, "is not just an organization to help vulnerable elderly people. It is a testament to how pain can be transformed into purpose, how it is possible to rebuild oneself after profound losses, and how it is never too late to start over." After his speech, the official documents were signed, giving legal life to the foundation. Deborah briefly explained how the financial aspect would work: a considerable fund that would ensure operations for many years, with the possibility of growth through new investments and donations. Joanna presented the plans for the partnership with the medical school, explaining how students could provide specialized care while gaining practical experience. Her colleagues spoke about the specialties they intended to develop: geriatrics, psychology, physical therapy, all focused on the specific needs of the elderly population. The 3 ladies from the support group shared their own stories. Mrs. Amelia, who was abandoned by her son after becoming a widow. Mrs. Conceição, who suffered financial abuse from her son-in-law. Mrs. Teresa, who was forced to leave her home to make way for relatives who never visited her. Painful stories, but told with dignity by women who, like me, had found the strength to move forward. When it was my turn to speak, I felt a lump in my throat, so many emotions, so many memories. So many transformations. A year ago, I lost my husband Antonio. I started with a trembling voice at first, but as I gained confidence, it was the first great loss. Then I lost my autonomy, my voice, my dignity in the hands of those who should have protected me. Finally, I lost my son, not to death, but to choices he made and that I had to make in response. I took a deep breath. Fernando smiled at me, encouragingly. But I also gained things. I gained clarity about who I am and what I deserve. I gained true friends. I looked at Lucia, who was discreetly wiping away a tear. I gained a purpose that goes beyond my own pain, and perhaps most importantly, I gained the certainty that at 67, my life is not ending. It's just beginning a new chapter. A murmur of approval swept through the room. I continued. The Antonio Bittencourt Foundation is not just a tribute to the wonderful man I had the privilege to share my life with. It's a promise to all the elderly who suffer in silence, who believe they don't have the right to respect, dignity, and autonomy. A promise that they are not alone, that their voices will be heard, that their pain matters. At that moment, I heard a noise coming from the entrance of the room. Turning around, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. Marcelo, my heart skipped a beat. He looked different, thinner, with deep dark circles, his hair disheveled. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something in his eyes I couldn't decipher. Pain, regret, anger. Before I could say anything, he turned and quickly left. There was a moment of confusion. Joanna made a move to go after him, but I gestured for her to stay. This was not the moment. If Marcelo had come, even if just to leave again, it meant something was changing. Seeds take time to germinate, especially in rocky soil. Regaining my composure, I concluded my speech. Today, we take the first step on a journey that I hope will bring comfort and hope to many. I thank each of you for being part of this moment, for believing in this vision, for helping me turn pain into purpose. After the applause, the meeting took on a more informal tone. Lively conversations filled the room, plans were discussed, ideas shared. I watched it all with a feeling of deep satisfaction. This was my new family, not defined by blood ties, but by conscious choices, mutual respect, and shared purposes. Fernando approached, offering me a new glass of sparkling wine. You look radiant today, Leonor, he said, his blue eyes shining with admiration. I smiled, accepting the glass. Our friendship had evolved into something more over the past few months. Not a passionate romance of youth, but a deep and respectful connection between two adults who had lived much and valued each other's company. We regularly went out for dinners, repairs, exhibitions. Sometimes, we simply sat together in the garden, reading in comfortable silence, appreciating each other's presence without the need for words. What are you thinking? He asked, noticing my moment of introspection. I replied honestly about how unpredictable life is. A year ago, I was at rock bottom, unable to see a way out. Today, I am surrounded by wonderful people, starting a meaningful project, feeling more alive than I have in decades. Fernando took my hand, squeezing it gently. You deserve every moment of happiness, Leonor. Never forget that. The party continued until early evening. When the last guest left, except for Fernando, who stayed to help me tidy up the house, I felt a good kind of tiredness, the kind that comes after a day of meaningful achievements. We sat together on the porch, watching the night sky dotted with stars. The same porch where a few months ago I cried alone, feeling helpless and hopeless. What are you thinking about now? Fernando asked, noticing my gaze lost on the horizon. About Marcelo, I admitted. About how he came today and left without speaking to me. Fernando sighed thoughtfully. Maybe he needs time, Leonor. Seeing you like this, strong and fulfilled, surrounded by people who respect you, must have been a shock for him. It contradicts the whole narrative he built about you being fragile, dependent, incapable. I nodded, understanding the wisdom in those words. I think part of me will always hope he comes back, that he understands, that he changes. That shows how strong you are. Fernando replied, surprising me. Keeping your heart open, even after so much suffering, is true strength. We sat in silence for a while, just enjoying the night, the gentle breeze, each other's presence. Finally, Fernando stood up to leave. Dinner tomorrow? He asked, gently kissing my forehead. I'd love to, I replied with a smile. After he left, I returned to the porch. The house was quiet, but it was no longer an oppressive silence. It was a peaceful silence, almost musical, like the pause between notes in a well-played symphony. I thought about everything that had happened since that fateful night. The pain, yes, had been intense. The break with my son, devastating. But from the darkness of those moments, a light was born that now illuminated not just my life, but potentially the lives of many others. You were right, Antonio. I whispered to the stars, imagining he could somehow hear me. There was a strength in me that I didn't even know I had. The next morning, I received an envelope delivered by a messenger. Inside was a handwritten letter, Marcelo's handwriting, which I would recognize anywhere. Mom, I came yesterday intending to talk to you, but when I saw you so confident, surrounded by people who clearly admire and respect you, I realized I wasn't ready. I didn't know what to say, how to behave in front of this new version of you that I never knew. Or maybe I did know and forgot. The last few months haven't been easy. Patricia left me 2 weeks ago, saying she didn't marry to live in a tiny apartment and work as a saleswoman. Ironically, I ended up experiencing a bit of what I made you go through, being treated as insufficient, inadequate, a burden. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking to come home. I'm not even asking for forgiveness because I don't know if I deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I'm rethinking many things, that yesterday, seeing what you built from so much suffering I caused, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, pride in being your son. Maybe one day I'll be ready for a real conversation. Until then, know that despite everything, I still love you, Marcelo. The tears came, inevitable. Not tears of pain, but a complex mix of emotions, relief, hope, a maternal love that never ceased to exist, despite everything. I carefully stored the letter away. It was too early to know if it marked the beginning of a reconciliation or just a late acknowledgement. Either way, it was a step. That night, dining with Fernando at a small Italian restaurant we had discovered together, I told him about the letter. What are you going to do? He asked, his eyes filled with understanding. Wait, I replied, feeling peace with that decision. Giving him the time he needs, giving myself the time I need. Some wounds take time to heal completely. He nodded, taking my hand across the table. And in the meantime, I smiled, feeling a deep certainty coming from the core of my being. Meanwhile, I live my life. I work at the foundation, learn new things, appreciate the friends I have, the places I can visit, the experiences I can live. I cherish each sunrise as a new beginning, each sunset as a celebration of the day that has passed. Fernando raised his glass in a toast. To life, then, to your life, Leonor Beitenker. A life that is just beginning. I lifted my glass, clinking it against his with a crystal-clear sound. Life, with all its surprises, challenges, and infinite possibilities. That night, returning home, my refuge, my personal kingdom, I felt a deep gratitude permeating my being. Gratitude for the pain that forced me to grow, for the losses that taught me to value what truly matters, for the challenges that revealed a strength I didn't know I had. At 67, I discovered that life is not a straight line from birth to death, but a spiral of constant evolution, that it's never too late to start over, to rediscover oneself, to become more authentically who you are. And perhaps this was the greatest revelation of all, that the true legacy Antonio left me wasn't the millions in the bank or the properties scattered around the city. It was the opportunity to finally discover who Leonor Beitenker is and to immensely like what I found. My story began with pain and humiliation when my own son called me an old hag in my own home, but it ended with power, freedom, and purpose. A journey I never imagined taking at 67 years old. After my husband Antonio's death, I faced what many elderly people endure in silence: family abuse. My son Marcelo and my daughter-in-law Patricia moved into my house under the pretense of taking care of me, but they really just wanted to take advantage. They started by taking small spaces, a chair here, a room there, until I became practically a prisoner in my own home, an intruder in the house I built with so much love alongside my husband. For an entire year, I endured cruel comments, disdainful looks, forced isolation from my friends. I was diminished day by day until I believed I truly was worthless, just a burden to my family. How many of us elderly people have gone through this? How many of us have stayed silent, thinking we deserve this treatment or that we have nowhere to go? But then came that decisive moment, the moment when my son told me to turn off the TV, calling me an old hag while his wife laughed at the situation. That very day, I had discovered that Antonio had left me his entire fortune. Over 8 million reais in assets. Everything was in my name. All that time I was treated like a burden. I was actually a rich woman, capable of taking care of myself. In that moment, something awakened inside me. A strength I didn't know I had, a dignity I had forgotten, a worth that had always been mine. I showed them the inheritance documents and gave them 48 hours to leave my home. I saw the shock on their faces, the disbelief, the quick change in attitude when they realized what they had lost with their behavior. But it wasn't about money, it never was. It was about respect, dignity, the right to be treated as a valuable human being. It was about reclaiming my voice, my space, my identity. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I rekindled old friendships like with my dear Lucia. I formed new bonds, like with Fernando, my neighbor, who became a special companion. I strengthened my relationship with my granddaughter Joanna, the only family member who always treated me with true love. More importantly, I found a greater purpose, creating the Antonio Bittencourt Foundation to help other seniors in situations similar to mine. I turned my pain into a mission, my traumatic experience into a helping hand for others who suffer in silence. I learned that it's never too late to start over, never too late to set boundaries, never too late to say no to abuse and yes to a dignified life. At 67, when many think life is ending, I discovered that mine was just beginning. As for my son Marcelo, our story isn't over. His letter, acknowledging what he did and expressing pride in the person I've become, planted a seed of possibility. I don't know if we'll ever have a healthy relationship again, but I know we're both on journeys of growth. Sometimes, love needs distance to bloom again in healthier soil. What I want you to take from this story is simple. Your worth doesn't diminish with age. Your rights don't disappear when your hair turns gray. Your voice shouldn't be silenced by those who should love you. And it's never, ever too late to take the reins of your own life. If you're going through a similar situation, know that you're not alone. Help is available from people who care. There's a future beyond abuse. And if you know someone in that situation, reach out. Be someone's Lucia, be Fernando, be the voice for those who have been silenced. Now I want to speak directly to you who have followed my story this far. First, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to listen to the account of a 67-year-old woman who discovered her strength when everyone thought she had none. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you reflect on how we treat our elders or on your own ability to start over, I ask you to leave a comment below. Your opinion means a lot to me. What would you do in my place? Do you know someone who has gone through a similar situation? What resonated with you the most in this account? I also ask you to like this video. It may seem like a simple gesture, but it makes all the difference in helping more people learn this story and perhaps find the courage to change their own lives. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, I invite you to subscribe now. Here we share real stories of overcoming, strength, and new beginnings. Stories that often remain hidden, but deserve to be told to inspire others and break the silence that often surrounds issues like domestic abuse, especially against the elderly. Visiting other videos on the channel will also show you more life stories that can move you and make you think. Each story here is a piece of the human experience told with sincerity and vulnerability. Know that producing these videos takes a lot of time, effort, and resources. So, if you can, consider contributing with a value DMACE, a way to donate that helps cover the channel's costs and allows us to bring more videos daily. Your contribution, no matter how small, makes a huge difference in helping us continue this work of giving a voice to those who are often unheard. This would greatly help us expand the channel's reach and touch even more lives with these stories of overcoming. Every dollar received is invested in producing quality content, researching new stories, and improving our technical skills to offer you the best experience possible. Remember that behind every elderly person is a rich story, a lifetime of experiences, struggles, loves, and lessons. Treating our elders with dignity and respect is not just a social obligation, but a recognition of the invaluable worth they represent. My journey from victim to protagonist of my own life is just beginning at 67. And every day I am grateful for the chance to share my story and perhaps inspire change in the lives of others. Thank you so much for listening to me so far. I hope to see you again in the next story here on the channel. Until then, remember, it's never too late to start over, to value yourself, to live with dignity and purpose. And it's never, ever too late to be happy. I look forward to your comments and hope this story has touched your heart, just as it came from mine. A warm hug from this lady who discovered at 67 that life is just beginning.